If many of the issues facing children in education could be seen as an access issue, imagine how far we could go. An educational label would define the help a child needed to access a curriculum, rather than limiting expectations and strangling potential. Because once we see an educational label as an access issue, we make great strides to overcome it. But what about those labels that are not viewed conceptually as access issues? When I entered the education system, I was given the label Profound and Multiple Learning Difficulties, also known as PMLD. Professionals assign this label to children who look like me, invariably in a wheelchair and with great difficulty communicating. This label has usually been bestowed before a child starts their formal education and before anyone has worked out how the child will access the curriculum. And once you have the label, it defines you. Condemned as a pupil with significant, profound intellectual disability, education is reduced to sensory stimulation and entertainment. When I was 7, I was taken out to my special school for an hour a day to be taught, by my mother, to read, write, and do basic maths. During the previous summer, I had done some work on basic phonics at home using an eye gaze computer. It was frustrating because the computer couldn't read my eyes very well, but my mother and carers could. My access to learning was found. Initially, the process was slow, but thankfully, the advice my mother was given resulted in her making the lessons more challenging, and I haven't looked back since. By year 5, 2 years after I started literacy and numeracy lessons at home, I had caught up with my peers and went on the roll of my local primary school. Technology has helped a lot of non-verbal people have a voice, but it is one access method of many. If the technology can't help, it doesn't mean there's no hope for the child. It just means that a different access must be found. Tragically, some teachers write to me thinking that if only their pupil had an eye gaze machine, they could teach them. If a child can use an eye gaze machine, they can definitely use a much cheaper Perspex eTran frame with learning resources stuck to it and held in front of them. My story is testament to the perseverance needed to find the right access. For some educational labels, there has been great progress in viewing the label as an access issue. If a child is given the label dyslexia, nobody nowadays assumes that because they will have difficulty reading and spelling, they can't access the curriculum. And in cerebral palsy, great strides have been made too. Last week, I was talking to Professor Annalou Waller about the issues of access in education. On the face of it, it looked like very little had changed in our educational experiences. But afterwards, she wrote me this. So much of your story resonates with where we were when I was your age. Although we can be despondent, I have to remind myself that 40 years ago, my parents were struggling to ensure an academic future for a child who could talk. Children of my level of disability have somewhat easier access to schooling today, although I contend that many are still missing out because of low expectations. So things have improved, we still have so far to go. If non-verbal children in wheelchairs were seen as having profound and multiple access to learning difficulties, then rather than writing off their potential and having no expectations of any progression, energy, time and resources would be spent focusing on access. And once our access is found, we need to be taught. One teacher who followed this principle is Emma Maskell-Ludlow, who concentrated on finding access for every one of the pupils in her PMLD class and discovered that not one of them fits a PMLD label. In an article in the SEN magazine, she advocates for the phrase complex access needs as a better definition of the cohort. As a voice for the voiceless, I will continue to advocate and campaign with my charity, Teach Us Too, until all children are taught to read and write regardless of their educational label. This poem is my experience in the classroom of having no access to a literacy curriculum due to the label PMLD. We are not capable of learning, so do not tell me there's something going on behind the disability. Treated as useless handicaps, minds with nothing in there, tragically stuck in a wheelchair, disabilities visibly crippling, just incontinent and dribbling. We are not academically able. You should make our minds stagnate in special education. We cannot learn to read, learn to spell, learn to write. Instead, let us be constrained by a sensory curriculum. It is not acceptable to say we have the capacity to learn. School should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. You are deluded to believe that our education could be looked at another way. But this poem is also my vision of what is possible in PMLD classrooms, where access to the curriculum is concentrated on and used to teach pupils. It is a reverse poem. Here it is, read from the bottom up. Our education could be looked at another way. You are deluded to believe that school should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. We have the capacity to learn. It is not acceptable to say, be constrained by a sensory curriculum. Instead, let us learn to write, learn to spell, learn to read. We cannot stagnate in special education. You should make our minds academically able. We are not just incontinent and dribbling, disabilities visibly crippling, stuck in a wheelchair, minds with nothing in there, tragically treated as useless handicaps. There's something going on behind the disability, so do not tell me we are not capable of learning.